Good afternoon, one and all. The hour of 2 o'clock having arrived, we will call the Finance and Government Operations Committee meeting to order. The first item of business under that call to order is to turn to the clerk and ask if the clerk would please establish the presence of a quorum. Mr. Clerk.
Supervisor Chavez. Present. Supervisor Simonian.
Here.
We have a quorum.
All right. Presence of a quorum having been established, that takes us to item number 2. Item number 2 is public comment. And public comment is that portion of our agenda set aside for comment by members of the public on non-agendized items that are properly within the jurisdiction of our committee. I have just one card today under public comment, and that's from Mr. Doug Muirhead. Mr. Muirhead, would you like to come on up? And as you know, I think we have 3 minutes set aside for public comment. Welcome.
Much appreciated. Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, supervisors and staff. For the record, my name is Doug Muirhead. I live in Morgan Hill.
Mr. Muirhead, excuse the interruption. We're going to stop your time so that we don't penalize you. And I'm going to ask the clerk to please elevate the volume. I had a little trouble hearing the clerk a minute ago, and that speaker does work just fine if you speak loud and clear, but I just think it's a little soft. All right, back to you, Mr. Muirhead, and apologies.
Not a problem. The soundbite for this comment is just say no to rules named Robert. I believe that Robert's Rules of Order are inappropriate for small government bodies such as our 7-person county commissions. But board operations says that the rules of the board require our boards and commissions be guided by Robert's Rules. A much better choice would be Rosenberg's Rules of Order, recommended by the League of California Cities. They are short enough that commissioners can effectively use them and the public can understand them. When Supervisor Simonian returned to county government, he would stop presenters and ask them to explain an acronym or a term not familiar to the public, saying that the public has a right to try and understand what our public servants are saying and doing to us. Should not our rules for running small, successful meetings for the benefit of the public be held to the same standard? 4 commissions, just say no to Robert and his rules. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And before you step away, could you tell us the name of the rules that you are suggesting again?
This is Robert's Rules of Order that the board operations tells me are mandated by your policies to be used for all boards and commissions in the county.
And I do recall that, and the name of the rules that you were suggesting, consistent with the League of California Cities, is?
Rosenberg's Rules of Order, a retired judge.
Rosenberg?
Rosenberg, yes, sir.
Got it. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right. Thank you very much. I'm going to confirm with the clerk that we have no other cards under public comment. All right. Thank you. That takes us to item number 3, which is to approve the consent calendar and any changes to the committee's agenda. And let me suggest, Supervisor Chavez, that looking at today's calendar, in addition to the 3 items that are slated for consent, and those are items 19, 20, and 21, if you're agreeable, we might add item number 11, item number 12, item number 13, and item number 14. And not that these aren't all important items, but as I indicated prior meetings, sometimes we feel like we have the information we need and or the matter can be simply dealt with in a single motion. Anything you'd like to keep on our regular agenda?
Could we add item, I may have misheard you, but can we add item 8, and did you already include item 10?
I did not. I have a quick question suggestion on item number 10, which is why I'm hoping to keep it on our regular agenda. And then on item 8 on the Measure A annual report, I also have a quick item or suggestion there. I don't think they'll be long. These my pieces won't be. Okay. She's looking at me like, we'll see when we get there. All right. All right. Items 11, 12, 13, and 14, as well as 19, 20, and 21. Can we get a motion to approve?
So moved.
Thank you. We have a motion by Supervisor Chavez to approve the consent calendar, amended to include items 11, 12, 13, and 14. And for those of you who are not familiar with the numbers, 11, 12, 13, and 14 are board-identified programs, fund transfers, county debt and interest rate swaps, SB 90 state-mandated cost reports, and fiscal year 18 competitive grant reports. Those are the other items being added to consent. Then we will ask all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Are there any opposed? Hearing none. Motion carries 2-0, and the consent calendar as amended is approved. Thank you again. That takes us to item number 4. And item number 4 is the Technology Services and Solutions Departments, TSS, procurement, and the procurement department's report regarding the efforts for inmate telephone services and tablets. Supervisor Chavez, we do have one card on this item. Would you like to hear from a member of the public first, and then we'll have the presentation, which may want to incorporate information specific to the member of the public. But I have a card from Mr. Ron Hansen. Mr. Hansen, come on up, and as I think you know, we allow 2 minutes for speakers at this point in the process.
Thank you. Good afternoon, supervisors and committee members. I am Ron Hansen, affiliated with PACT, People Acting in Community Together. From the minutes of the Inmate Welfare Fund meeting of October 14th, 2015, almost exactly 3 years ago, we read, those in attendance were advised that 500 tablets were part of the new GTL contract and would be divided equally between the main jail and Elmwood, and that a meeting to discuss the tablet deployment was scheduled sometime in the next few weeks. Unfortunately, the GTL dramatically oversold their tablet program, and a year after that 500 tablet prediction, not one tablet was deployed throughout 2016. A year after that, in November of 2017, 2 years after the IWF promise, an RFP was issued for the purpose of, among other things, tablet procurement. The RFP projected having an approved and executed contract by April 2018. But here we are, 6 months after April, nearly a year after the release of the RFP, and 3 years after that IWF prediction, and still no tablets. And after reading today's report, a contract for inmate tablets is still not in place. All this is to say that providing tablets to those in our jails has been a 3-year and counting series of promises, statements of intention, missed deadlines, and repeated disappointment to those both on the inside and to their loved ones. And so I ask you on this committee, supervisors and committee members alike, please apply whatever influence you may have to bring this absurdly long and frustrating effort to deploy tablets to a successful conclusion, at least by the early days of 2019. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Why don't I ask Dr. Smith who he wants to have present on this item, and then we'll go to board members for comments and questions.
I think we'll start with Ann Duncan.
All right, Ms. Duncan, if you would introduce yourself, even though you've been semi-introduced, as well as your colleague there at the table.
Thank you. I'm Ann Duncan. I'm the Chief Information Officer for the county.
Dan Baldry, IT Director for Public Safety and Justice.
Thank you. What would you like us to know, if anything, to supplement the material we have in our packets?
So I think I would just add, in response to public comment, I wholeheartedly agree that this process has taken too long and that we need to make it faster. Dan and I are committed to moving this forward, and I'll open for questions.
Anything else from your colleague, Ms. Balder? No? Supervisor Chavez, I see your light is on.
I just wanted to make sure that I understood the strategy around the Wi-Fi, the decoupling Wi-Fi from the other service, if the way I'm reading the report and some background information that we got. And perhaps, anyway, if you could give some thought to that.
So the Wi-Fi implementation at the jail and the tablet and phone project were always planned as two separate projects. I know that there's been some recent effort to look at combining those, which at this late date actually complicates things more than it simplifies things. Procuring the Wi-Fi is actually a pretty straightforward process. We have an existing hardware contract. We have easy access to implementation resources. That's a much shorter lead time effort than the tablet and phone part of the project, as well as adding that to the tablet phone project would add complexity to that project.
And the Wi-Fi, the Wi-Fi will be ready when the tablets are on board, I guess. I want to make sure we're not waiting for one over the other, and I'm not sure the very best way to ask that question, but that's what I'm interested in getting an outcome for.
Yes, the intention of project sequencing is that Wi-Fi will be complete before the phones and tablets are available for deployment.
Is the Wi-Fi project underway now?
So the Wi-Fi project's in design right now. It's not, nothing's been procured as of yet, and it's not in implementation.
Is there a timeline for that that you want to highlight relative to this other body of work?
Yes, so we would completely agree that the Wi-Fi is necessary for the tablets to function. So at this point, we have a quote using our existing master contract for Wi-Fi devices. So we're prepared to execute on that within the next week or two. We have an estimated 3-day delivery time for the access points themselves, after which we'll be partnering with our facilities department as well as internal network services on the installation and implementation of those so that they're ready for the tablets to be used.
Thank you.
I don't think it'll come as a surprise to anyone who's followed this conversation previously. I've been concerned about the charges for calls in previously in our juvenile hall system and in our jails. I believe where we finally have landed after extended conversation is that we want to offer calls essentially on a cost recovery break-even basis. Is that a fair summary of where we are these days?
I'm afraid I don't have the details on that at the moment.
Okay.
But we'd be happy to get them for you if you'd like, Supervisor.
Well, here's where I'm headed, which is, you know, when I prompted this conversation 5.5, 6 years ago now, you know, the world was a different place. I think people were surprised at the concern that I expressed about the, forgive me, there's no other way to put it, price gouging that we were engaged in. And, you know, we made some immediate progress at Juvenile Hall and a little slower progress at the county jail. There was action at the federal level, which sort of went one way, then went another in terms of limiting the cost of those calls. There is a larger policy debate, obviously, about the benefit of keeping folks connected to their families and to their community while still providing for public safety and screening the calls. Part of the reason I asked is sort of where we are in this process is because as someone who follows this somewhat obscure issue, it came to my attention that New York jails are now going to go totally free. They've just said, the heck with it, let's just tell people pick up the phone and call. And that's a pretty dramatic departure from what has been the sort of standard operating procedure in correctional facilities across the country for a very long time. But why don't we ask you to come back with an update specifically on the cost recovery issue and what the implications would be of a simply free model as compared or contrasted at our next meeting, please.
And we can do that. And let me be clear, our intention certainly in this process is to not make it a profit center, right? We are very clear on the direction of not having it be a profit center.
May I follow up on that?
Sure. Supervisor Chavez?
I think that the issue, and I appreciate the point you're raising around being a profit center, and I do know that we've changed policies so that we're not doing that anymore on any subject. I don't think it's simply that. It's that, and I think this is true of a lot of service providers to institutions, whether they be jails or hospitals, is that for a very long time, the contract structures allowed them to take advantage of the institutions that they were connected to. And these kinds of companies are notorious, I think, for taking advantage of, and they used to be because we had so few service providers. So one of the reasons we wanted these, or I was really interested in the contracts being linked, is I was hoping it would attract some folks who hadn't been in the take advantage of prisoner business and who were going to be interested in working with us long-term in a broader way. So in addition to not being cost centers, we're really talking about companies that have the ability to provide the service for a fair price and not put ourselves in a situation where we and the people that we serve are being taken advantage of. So thank you for that.
Yeah, and just to finish off the conversation, one of the things we confronted, of course, when we started to talk about this issue a little more seriously was that we, the County of Santa Clara, were taking a pretty hefty cut, and that money went into the Inmate Welfare Fund, and that absent those funds in the Inmate Welfare Fund, then we'd have to use general fund dollars to pay for the programs and services that were there. And we made a conscious decision that we were prepared to do that. And we were fortunate in that we had the resources in the general fund to do that. But it was, for me, it was particularly troubling, and I don't mean this in a jaded or cynical way. I sort of understood that folks from outside were going to look to capture, every increment of profit that they possibly could. But I was very much troubled and remain troubled by public agency price gouging what is both literally and figuratively a captive audience. That's the folks have been in these conversations before, have heard me on this subject before, but I just, if this is sort of newer to some to you, I want to sort of say that's been the thing that's been troubling me. And as I say, at this point, part of what I'm asking is it just easier to say, you know what, just make the calls free? And the answer to that may be no. I don't have a conclusion yet. I would tell you if I had a strongly held opinion, but I think it's worth talking about, and I would specifically ask you to take a look at what's going on in New York. All right. So we're going to, Supervisor Chavez, this is simply to receive the report. So if I could ask for a motion to receive the report and ask staff to return at our next regularly scheduled meeting. And that next regularly scheduled meeting is actually going to be Thursday, November the 8th. Can I get a motion to that effect? Motion from Chavez, second by Simidian, without objection. Approved. Thank you. That takes us to item number 5. Item number 5 is some updated surveillance technology use policies for various departments, and I do have questions on a number of these. In some cases, we were able to give you at least a little bit of a heads up. In a few cases, not, but let's just see if we can make our way through these as expeditiously as possible. And Supervisor Chavez, I'm going to march through them as we go. Would you like to weigh in as we do them, or would you like me to go through all of them and then come back to you? Whatever works. Okay. Good. All right, then I'll sort of turn my head and look to you before each item. All right? And items A and B, Office of Pretrial Services. Do we have somebody from pretrial who could be with us? Thank you. And these are surveillance technology use policies for electronic alcohol monitoring devices and for global positioning system electronic monitoring devices. These are A and B, as I said. And my question in both, and what I'd like to do actually, because I think it's a little easier to have the conversation, is focus on the GPS item first, even though I'm slightly out of order, because that's B. And the issue I have in both cases, and I hope the word got to you, is about the data retention policy language. So I'm going to look at page 2 of 3 in the document, packet page 23, data retention. It says the data collected by the GPS devices shall be retained for up to 7 years unless a specific request is made to delete it earlier. And then it goes on to make the case that this retention period is appropriate because of the often lengthy nature of criminal proceedings, including all appeals, post-conviction challenges, and the like, as well as the possibility that an individual's location at a certain date and time may become relevant to a separate criminal investigation involving the same or a different individual that may not commence until many years later. That sounds to me like we're creating a database of otherwise lawful movements based on the possibility that we might be able to use it because the person we got the information on is somebody who's in the criminal justice system and therefore somebody we think might be acting badly later on. I'm looking specifically at the purpose section of the policy where it says during the pretrial phase of criminal proceedings. So I'm assuming, and please correct me if I have this wrong, that means before anybody's been convicted of anything. During the pretrial phase of criminal proceedings, a Superior Court judge may order an individual facing criminal charges to submit to electronic monitoring as a condition of pretrial release, potentially in conjunction with other conditions of release. And then it goes on to say that the electronic monitoring shall be accomplished by requiring the individual to wear a GPS-enabled electronic ankle bracelet to track the individual movements 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, provided the device continues to have battery life. So here's the scenario that I'm contemplating, and I'm trying to figure out why I would think it was appropriate to keep information for 7 years. Supervisor Chavez and I are arrested for a burglary. In order to get released, we're told okay, you have to wear an ankle bracelet. That's part of the pretrial process, as I understand it. It takes 2 years before the case comes to trial. Is that a possibility? Should I pick a different time? Should I say a year?
A year is probably.
All right, let's say a year. So for a year, we're wearing ankle bracelets. We go to court, we're found not guilty. And during the year, we followed all the rules. So we've been arrested, we've been released with ankle bracelets, the GPS data has been maintained for a year, we've been found not guilty, and now you want to keep a record of our lawful movements as people who've never been convicted of any crime for 7 years. And what's the rationale for that again? Other than the fact that we've been arrested and therefore might have a propensity to be bad people whose movements you want to have a record of because it might be useful to prove that we did something else wrong since we weren't convicted in the first place. Can you see where I'm going with this question?
I can.
Okay, because I'm not trying to be subtle here at all, as you can tell. Go to it.
Again, I think in just looking at our current departmental log and record reports for our retention, from the time that those cases are closed, we currently hold that information for 5 years. We had looked at this as trying to be consistent with the current policies that we have had. And there is a piece in there, I believe, that states if the record is asking to be expunged before that.
Could you speak into the microphone, please?
There's another piece in there stating that if it's been requested to be removed prior to that, that we could definitely do that as well. So.
And I assume we're looking at the same set of issues around electronic alcohol monitoring devices as well.
It's monitoring something different, but
Yep.
yes.
Okay. I'm not hearing or reading an argument about why we want to have a database, because the whole point of the pretrial, either electronic alcohol monitoring device or the GPS, is to monitor someone's behavior unrelated to the issue with which they've been charged, yes? I mean, this is about whether or not they pose a risk and are free and outside of the jail while they're awaiting trial. That's hence the phrase pretrial services.
The GPS is specific to either exclusion zones or home detention, which could be related to the charge. The alcohol monitoring is typically specifically related to the charge for DUI or
Okay.
things like that. So it's a compliance piece, yeah.
Okay, so then the question I have is, why would we keep this information for 7 years if it's related to the charge? Why couldn't we say that it's deleted within 1 year after the charge has been adjudicated?
I can definitely look into that.
Okay. Could we ask you to come back? I'm going to turn to Supervisor Chavez on these two items, but I understand that the culture has historically been to just hang on to the data for as long as you can, because you never know when you'll be able to use it. But absent some bad behavior that is identified during the pretrial period, or absent some relevance to the charge. So even if Supervisor Chavez and I had been arrested and the case came up in a year and we were found guilty, okay, it's still not clear to me why our lawful movements need to be a matter of public record for 7 years, or our compliance with the electronic alcohol monitoring device once the charge has been adjudicated. So the pretrial notion of, are they safe to be out? Will they follow their conditions? That's done. The adjudication has come to a conclusion. And it's, again, a question of why would we want to have a database on people for 7 years? Supervisor Chavez, I see your light's on. I want to turn to you.
So thank you, Joe. That's actually one question I wanted to get asked too, and it would be good to give a little more thought to that. And there are two pieces to that, because on the one hand, I want to, oh, I can't believe I said that. On the one hand, I want to make sure that that we're being fair and appropriate, and I think Supervisor Simitian's right that we want to make sure that we're not holding information over lawful citizens. I think that's exactly right. On the other hand, the two issues I want to make sure you think about as you come back to us with an option for dates is whether or not we currently or would be using aggregate data, not specific to the person, but aggregate data for any kind of research or assessments relative to testing the tools that we're using for pretrial services. It's one thing I want to make sure we think about. And then the second is that I also know that sometimes people who are in our public safety and justice system as someone who's waiting pretrial services or who's in detention, that they sometimes want to give us feedback or make complaints, and they worry about us destroying data before they have access to it as well. So understanding what period of time, using a mechanism that the person's informed that the data will go away. And I'll just use something that's a little more concrete, and that is as we save video recordings of people being arrested or any of those things. So I think it's kind of a double-edged sword, and there's some fear that we get rid of data, and that is something that could be helpful to the particular person whose data it is. And then the third issue, and I was really reminded of this just listening to Dr. Blasey Ford's comments about how, over what period of time does someone who's been victimized report. And so you raised a really good point, and we're looking at the ODARA tool, which we're testing to protect people who've been victims of domestic violence, and also to determine whether or not that the person is a risk to the person they've already harmed or others. If during that time another incident occurs but is unreported, do we worry at all about the lack of or the opportunity for cooperation using that same tool? And I know that's not what it's for as we speak about it. I mean, I guess it is, because we don't want them committing another crime. So how long do we keep it? Again, to strike the balance that Supervisor Simitian's talking about, but how long do we keep it as cases may continue to be ongoing? Because even if you're adjudicating in one case, sometimes cases are ongoing, even if you're just able to respond to one component of the case. So I think that's particularly true in domestic violence, which is really the area that I'm mindful that is a little more complicated and can sometimes be multiple cases linked together. So if you can include that in your thinking.
All right, thank you. Then what I'm going to do is ask that we simply continue these two and have them come back with the next batch or the batch after that, however much time you need, but not advance these. And again, my specific concern is the 7-year retention. And yes, I did see that there's essentially the ability to ask that the information be deleted. I don't think we ought to be putting the burden on people to have to know and ask to have their information deleted. Again, I don't have a problem with holding the information during the pretrial period because you're attempting to monitor pretrial behavior. So up until the time that there's a trial, that's what it's for. And I understand and accept the notion that the information may in fact be not just about the conditions of release pretrial, but may be relevant to the adjudication, fine. But once the matter has been adjudicated, hanging on to the records, particularly the GPS records, locational privacy, during that period of time, I'm not hearing any persuasive argument about why that's appropriate, let alone necessary. Okay? So to be continued. Thank you very much. And that takes us then to item C, which is the Office of the Assessor digital cameras used to assess property. I had no comments or questions about that item. However, let me turn to Supervisor Chavez. That's not one of hers. I do have a question about item D, Office of the Assessor, video cameras in the assessor's office. So I could see you hoping you could go back to your seat, but not quite. Thank you for that. And the question here is specific, Mr. Coelho, and I see Mr. Shapiro with you as well. Thank you both for being here. But It is specific to this policy, but it will apply to some of the others that come. So if I could ask both of you gentlemen to be mindful as we go through some of the others, that would be appreciated. Looking at the policy on page 3 of 3, and this for those of us who have packet pages, packet page 39, under public access, it says, and I'm looking at the top of the page, should law enforcement request any surveillance footage for an ongoing investigation, a written email or letter shall be sent to the assistant assessor. So that makes it plain that if somebody wants to access the information, that they need to send something in writing by email. And this is in connection with video cameras in the assessor's office in this building on floors 3, 4, and 5, just to make sure that there's a safe and professional environment. No problem with anything that you're proposing, but it does raise a question and a concern for me, which is, so does that, what happens then? So I understand that the assessor's office is saying we want a request from law enforcement to come in writing. I think that's a sound practice, good. But then do we give it to somebody because they ask? Do we say we get to make a judgment about that? The we in this case is the assessor's office, and of course understanding that the assessor is an independently elected official. Would the assessor give it to anyone who showed up who had a badge and a uniform? Would they require a warrant or a subpoena? Thoughts?
Yes, so we should have probably added that we would be consulting with the Office of County Counsel for their advice in response to the written request for this type of information.
Let me tell you how good an answer that was. That now allows me to turn to the county council and say, so does that mean we'd give it to anybody with a badge or a uniform, or does that mean that they'd need a subpoena or a warrant? What do we anticipate?
Well, I think our first assessment, Supervisor, Rob Coelho from County Counsel's office, I think our first assessment would be whether or not there are any specific board policies or direction already relating to the request or the type of request. So, for example, if the request was from an ICE agent, we already have board direction that we would not voluntarily cooperate with the request for information in that regard, and so we would advise the assessor's office accordingly. If we're a different type of request, we would make a determination as to whether or not it was lawfully required to be disclosed voluntarily. We check the law, and then determine if it was lawfully or prohibited, legally prohibited from disclosure without a subpoena. We'd have to determine based on the specific request. And if it's legal to disclose or illegal to disclose, we would share that information. But ultimately, the decision on disclosure is not a county council decision. It's an administration decision. We would provide the guidance and presumably in an instance like that, consult with the county executive's office as well as the assessor's office so that a determination could be made in that specific instance.
Well, so we've already got a little fuzziness about, is it the assessor who makes the call because he's the independently elected official, or is it the county executive's office who makes the call because they're the operators of the administration? But before we let the county executive share his opinion on that, let me go back to the county council again. So let me just ask the question. So what happens then if a sheriff's deputy shows up, presents himself to, I guess it's the assistant assessor, has sent the requested email and says, I want the footage for your lobby for the last 3 days. And the assistant assessor says, could you tell me why? And sheriff's deputy says, I prefer not to. What do we do?
Well, based on the policy, if the board approves this policy, there is the following section after public access is third-party data sharing relating to law enforcement agencies. And specifically, it says that that information may be shared only with written consent of the assessor or assistant assessor tied to a specific administrative, civil, or criminal investigation.
Let me interrupt you for just a minute. I apologize because this question is going to come up later as well. And this is one of statutory construction and plain old-fashioned high school grammar. And I'm actually better on the former than I am on the latter, so I need some help on this. It says third-party data sharing shall be limited to only the following: law enforcement agencies, comma, with no qualifier, county retained investigative personnel, comma, with no qualifier, or other investigative personnel in connection with a specific administrative, civil, or criminal investigation or action. Now, am I supposed to read the qualifier? Are we supposed to read the qualifier about with a specific administrative, civil, or criminal investigation or action as applying to the two preceding references, law enforcement agencies and county retained investigative personnel?
That was the intent in drafting.
How do you think it turned out in terms of clarity about that point?
Well, the fact that you're asking the question makes me believe it's not as clear as it was intended.
It could just mean I wasn't a top grammar student, and which would be an accurate statement. I'm prepared to acknowledge that. Let me just suggest this area needs some work in my view. So, for example, what is the I mean, not clear to me what would happen if a sheriff's deputy showed up. Not clear to me what would happen if a San Jose police officer showed up. Not clear to me what would happen if even somebody from ICE showed up. In our what's the authority that we've given, or the policy direction that we've given? If you could remind me how and where we gave that, I'll turn to Dr. Smith now. Thank you.
Yes, sorry to throw another monkey wrench into the works. However, from the county administrator's perspective, the fact that the Board of Supervisors considers implementing a policy to deal with this particular issue, in addition to state law, is pretty clear that the property is owned by the county, and therefore it is not a policy that should be implemented by the assessor or the assistant assessor. It's a policy that would be implemented by the county executive pursuant to the direction of the Board of Supervisors. The fact that he's an independently elected official is immaterial because he doesn't own the property, just like he doesn't own his office space or his employees or any other property that's provided by the county. We would strongly suggest that if the board believes that they're able to exercise policy direction over the use of this property, that it has to be enforced by the county executive, not by anyone else, because the board can't make policy that directs the independently elected official to do anything.
Yeah, and this
So much for that.
well, no, and just so the assessor's office or any other elected official office doesn't feel like that's unusual in any respects. Same rules, I believe, apply to our Board of Supervisors, the 5 members of the board. I'm very clear about the fact that my email isn't my email; it's the county's email, and that county council isn't county council for the 5th Supervisorial District; it's county council for the county of Santa Clara, and so on and so forth. But it does take me back to this question. The board's policy, if somebody could just refresh my memory, because Mr. Coelho, you were actually anticipating the question I had about ICE officials. Can you remind me how we have articulated that? I honestly don't remember in the moment what the vehicle was for our policy statement.
There's both a 2010 resolution as well as a board policy in Chapter 3, but this would really speak to the 2010 resolution, which provides that the county won't cooperate with ICE for the purposes of civil immigration enforcement, and so we require criminal warrant or criminal subpoena, because ICE does also do criminal-related activities in order to provide information or materials to ICE.
And I remember that conversation, not at all because I wasn't here at the time, but I remember that language being referenced when we had some conversation in 2013-14, I think, about Sheriff's Department cooperation with ICE officials. But it sounds to me like you are saying that the 2010 action by this board, or the board at the time, was broader than that in its scope. Am I understanding you correctly?
Yeah, it's a county-wide policy. It applies to all county programs, not just the sheriff's office. The issues that tend to arise have mostly been in the context of the county jail. That's where a lot of the national and local discussion has been centered, but the county's policy applies to all programs and services.
But I understood you to say in connection with civil matters, but not necessarily with criminal matters.
That's correct. So if we receive a subpoena judicial warrant, ICE does investigate criminal matters. The county does comply with those.
I'm remembering, however, that in the sweep in Oakland within the last couple of years, I have no way of verifying the accuracy, but the representation that was made was that 100 folks who did not have outstanding criminal warrants were swept up as part of the same effort, even though the sweep was described as targeting criminal enforcement.
Well, that's why we require a warrant or a subpoena. So it's not.
Got it.
It's
Okay.
not just a generic, statement from ICE.
All right. Could we ask the assessor's office to work with county council to think through some of these issues? And, part of, understanding that you can never anticipate every eventuality, I do think a little more clarity about in the drafting. I am much more comfortable if, as Mr. Coelho suggests, the drafting intended that law enforcement agencies be the recipients of the requested data in connection with a specific administrative, civil, or criminal investigation, which is described in some way so that we know what it's for, than simply letting somebody show up and say, I want your materials. Because the potential for misuse or abuse, which happens inevitably with the small number of bad apples, is just too great. And then there's this further issue about who has the responsibility for eventual approval in an organization with an independently elected official, but that is nonetheless administered by the county more broadly. So I'm hoping we can sort that out, but with a little more clarity. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. That takes us to items E and F, which are Office of County Council digital audio recorders, and F, Office of the County Council digital cameras. I don't have any comments or questions in connection with those. Supervisor Chavez? Okay. And then that takes us to G, Office of the County Council network server camera. And this, frankly, I just have a quick question because apparently I should have known this but didn't. So I just want to make sure I understand how this works. We have a server, and we have a camera on that server, and the camera on that server provides a live video stream so that we can make sure no one's messing with our server. Is that how it works?
It's a camera of the physical server.
Yeah, that's what I'm asking. Okay.
Yeah, and it also provides, my understanding, I don't personally use it, but my understanding is it also allows them to visually see kind of the status, lights, and so forth of the server system. It's basically a closet, a camera in the closet.
Doesn't sound like must-see TV to me, but that's the process as far as we understand it. Yes. Okay. I have no. I just want to make sure I understood what we're talking about. Thank you. Item Supervisor Chavez, anything on that one? H is Office of the County Executive digital cameras. I have no questions or concerns. I, Office of the County Executive Equal Opportunity Department audio recorders. No questions or concerns there. J, Office of the County Executive Office of Emergency Services Situational Awareness Tools. I think I'm fine, but I do have a question. Is there somebody here who's from that agency or department? Thanks. And again, if you'd just introduce yourself for the record, even though we may know who you are.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair. Dana Reed, OES.
Thanks so much. My question here is from packet page 84, which is page 3 of 3, the third-party data sharing. And so this is a little different than some of the other questions that we've been probing. It indicates that the regional EOCs and other specific third-party partner agencies in the law enforcement and emergency management fields shall be granted access to the information in Web EOC to enable regional coordination of incident response and recovery, but shall not release that information to other outside parties. So that's a clear statement or of a prohibition about sharing that information. Why is that information not public information?
Very good question. So that particular platform is used when we activate the EOC to track resource requests, situational awareness as it relates to the event or the emergency. All the 15 jurisdictions have access to that platform and, in fact, inform that platform with data and information. Folks that are working in the EOC are granted access during the activation to look at that platform, input data, and assess what's going on in there to make decisions, operational decisions. The management room uses it to prioritize operational decisions. But it's not a public-facing platform. We keep the data from the incident, and then if we need to access it for reference at some point in time, we can do that. But it's not a public-facing platform, and it's only granted to authorized users during the activation, and or other EOCs that are activated will put data into it for their own jurisdictions, and we are granted access to review that data to assist them.
Understanding that it's not a public-facing platform, there are lots of things we do as a county that are not publicly shared, but that we are nonetheless obliged under the California Public Records Act to share if requested. So looking to County Council now, I guess my question is, if somebody came along a year later, could be the civil grand jury, could be a local news organization, could be a concerned member of the public, and said, I wanted to see that data to see how your organization performed in that period of emergency so that we could assess whether or not our government was serving us well, would we then say to them, sorry, but that's not information we relate to outside parties?
Supervisor, that would fall under Section 7 of the same policy, so the one section above which relates to public access?
It would, except it's Section 7 up above says that if there's a request, that it'll be made public or deemed exempt from the public disclosure pursuant to state or federal law after consultation with the Office of the County Council if a California Public Records request was made. But here, contrary to what it says in 7, it says flat out, shall not release the information to other outside parties. I'd be perfectly comfortable with this if the flat out prohibition were removed and the indication was that we'll make it available consistent with state or federal law. But it seems to me we've with the language in paragraph 8 right now, we've essentially already reached the conclusion we're not sharing that information. And if somebody told me that there was a reason why we couldn't or shouldn't, but I'm not hearing that.
Yeah, actually, Supervisor, let me try to clarify if I may, and it may be in the drafting. In Section 8, that second sentence, it refers to what third parties may do with the information that are provided to them. With respect to the request of the county, that's the public access section that talks about we'll treat it as a Public Records Act request. We'll respond to it in accordance with state or federal law. There's a requirement to consult with county council. So the third-party data sharing section doesn't refer to what the county will or won't share. It refers only to the stuff that the county controls. We give certain third parties access to it, and it says they shall not share it. Your point and question may be identical, but I want to clarify what the sections are.
Well, it says regional EOCs and other specific third-party partner agencies in law enforcement and emergency management fields shall be granted access to the information in WebEOC. Now, WebEOC is ours, yes?
That is correct. That is ours.
Then it says, but shall not release that information to other outside parties. So taking your point, Mr. Coelho, that's saying that if some other regional EOC accesses our information from WebEOC, that they can't share it, yes?
That was the intent in the drafting based on the policy direction, correct.
And my question then and you've helped me redefine my question a little bit, is why? Why would that why is that something we're telling them they can't share with somebody else? Is there something proprietary? Is there personnel? I mean, why shouldn't they be going through the same exercise at their place saying, maybe it's a public record, or maybe there's an exemption? You want some more time to think on this one?
Yeah, we can discuss it from
Yeah.
a legal and then policy perspective and report back to the committee.
I just want, I mean, the healthy tension that Supervisor Chavez alluded to earlier is, on the one hand, we, don't want to be giving out information that we shouldn't. On the other hand, we don't want to be making blanket statements about the public doesn't have access to what is presumably otherwise public information. And if there's a bona fide reason, I think it'd be helpful to know what it is. But we kind of don't get to say none of your business in the public arena, and I know we all know that. So that's the question. All right. Thank you. Look forward. Oh, and excuse me, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, not at all. I just wanted to follow up on the point I raised earlier, which is I really hope as these come forward that you let us know when, for purposes of scholarship, we need to think about records maintenance and records usage. And in particular, in some of the areas that you're working on, one, the activities could be terrorist activities or any number of activities that fall under this area, which I'm sure under those circumstances you may want to speak to us differently about what information is or isn't available. But I'm also mindful of this as we think about things like, we're seeing wildfires behaving differently than we did 2 or 3 or 4 years ago, in part based on brush, in part based on temperature, in part based by, which may be signs of climate change. But so I guess I just want to make sure as each of these come forward that you let us know how we would distinguish or when we should or when data needs to be kept. And I think the point that Supervisor Simidian is leaning to is I do think, he said this a couple times, I do think we have to be mindful that there has to be a reason to keep something from the public, not a reason to give it to the public. So, just as you muddle through this as we are, help us think about multiple uses of data, again, when it may be appropriate.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you. And just for any of you who are wondering, couldn't they have sorted all this out beforehand? The answer is no, because on a 2-person committee, we can't talk to each other about the substantive work of the committee, or that would be a violation of the Brown Act. But also, one of the benefits of this sometimes painful process, in my view, is that it helps us have these conversations with the departments and agencies that are going to have to actually implement this stuff, both so that we make better decisions as a committee and as a board, but also so that these questions start to be part of the thinking in departments and agencies that understandably are focused on their mission rather than on some of these kinds of questions about privacy and data security and surveillance. That takes us then to item K, Office of the County Executive Reentry Resource Center Security Cameras. I'm okay there. L, Office of the Medical Examiner Coroner Digital Cameras. I'm okay there. Item M, and I'm going to keep looking to Supervisor Chavez to make sure she's fine as we go. The Office of the Public Defender Alternate Defender Digital Audio Recorders, okay there. Item N, Office of the Public Defender Alternate Defender Digital Cameras, okay there. And then I'm okay there. That takes us to O, Probation Department. And if somebody from probation is here, that would be great, because I would like to talk about the 7-year provision here again as well. Thank you. Welcome, gentlemen. Could you introduce yourselves, please?
Nick Burchard, Deputy Chief Juvenile Probation over Institutions.
Thank you.
Gap Lay, Division Manager over Adult Services.
Thank you so much. In looking at the electronic monitoring program devices and that includes global positioning system, radio frequency, and alcohol monitoring devices. I was struck again under the data retention paragraph, which is paragraph number 6 on page 3 of 4, our packet page 121. It says that physical backups of data shall be made by the host companies. These backups, which shall include both active and inactive clients' records, shall be stored for up to 7 years. And again, this is for folks presumably who've been on probation, and I'm trying to understand the rationale for keeping the information for 7 years.
So that is correct. Clients are on probation or have been adjudicated. At this time, I don't have an answer for the 7-year questions. We're going to have to research on that and get back to you.
If you could, and again, I know that the culture, in law enforcement and ancillary agencies has been get as much data and keep it as long as you can, but, the question here is if there's no active case, particularly if someone has not had any presumably if they've had violations on their probation, that's going to have consequences, yes? But if they don't have violations on their probation, I'm wondering why we're keeping records of folks' lawful behavior for 7 years. To what end? What's the rationale? Okay. Supervisor Chavez on this one? All right. Thank you. Then, thank you, gentlemen. We'll bring that one back. Thanks. Then, that takes us to P, and that's the probation department on the James Ranch video security system. And Supervisor Chavez, I think you indicated you had some comments or questions here.
Thanks, gentlemen. On this one, I wanted to ask if you wouldn't mind giving me a timeline. It can be off agenda, but for this committee, or maybe for all of our colleagues, they might be interested in an off-agenda report with a timeline and relative upgrades to the surveillance system at the ranch. In particular, I'm interested in the video and the audio, and I know it's something we had talked about a while ago. I just haven't learned where it is in the process.
So, not to be confused with Juvenile Hall and where their video surveillance system is, and the report back that you had asked us to do is different than the ranch because the ranch doesn't have the capacity under the current James Ranch video surveillance. It's just that CVT TV where you just view it and it's in real time. It doesn't have the capacity to have any storage whatsoever.
So my question is, do we have, for some reason, I recalled us having a project to upgrade the campus with audio that could in fact be stored, and that's really what I'm asking is that a project today? Is it a funded project? Where is it? Whose job is it?
Yes and yes. It's being discussed with the new ranch program and facility that's being built. It's all part of the project that's being built at this time. So upgrading the current system is part of the project.
Got it. Yeah. So it'll be completed concurrent with the completion of the project?
And hopefully before you and I retire, correct.
And then the second part of that is that since it's not the entire campus that's being rebuilt, so what happens to the rest of the campus relative to this technology?
All in discussion on how we're going to upgrade that to meet those requirements as well.
So could you let us know where that is in process and what, if any, impediments there are and what that timeline looks like?
Certainly will.
Great.
Probably
Thank
when
you.
we report back, yes.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
That being said, I'm ready to move forward with this item today in terms of the policy. You okay with that, Supervisor Chavez? Okay, thank you. That takes us to the Procurement Department, item Q. Thank you again, gentlemen. Audio recorders. And is there someone here from Procurement? Thank you. And I'm going to have a couple of issues here. where I'm going to ask both Mr. Coelho and Mr. Shapiro to help us on all of the ones we forward today. So there will be a sort of a couple of generic issues here. Thank you, gentlemen. You want to introduce yourselves? Welcome.
Sure. Andrew Zavoyski, Director of OCCM.
Thank you.
Michael Fogelstrom with OCCM.
Thank you both. If I missed it, I apologize. We're talking about the use of audio recorders in the procurement department, and there was a very clear explanation, which I appreciated, of how these are used for recording the proceedings of pre-bid, pre-proposal conferences. I didn't see anything in the document, though, that said that this was going to only be done with the informed consent of those present, meaning that everybody would know they were being recorded. Is there any language in the document that I just missed as I was reading 20 different documents?
We would normally inform them that we are recording, but we wouldn't be seeking their consent.
Okay.
I have a strange feeling that if we did, they'd probably say, no, please don't record, and then it would be kind of moot.
Okay. Understanding then that this is you would normally be doing it, is there anything that would inform them? Is there any reason why the language couldn't indicate that you were going to inform people that the conference was being recorded?
We can certainly do that.
And then let me just ask, under data access, and this is paragraph number 4, on the procurement, it says the procurement department contract manager or designee shall have access to audio recordings from the audio recorders. Other personnel may be granted access by the director of procurement, director, or designee. I'm not sure if there's a typo there or not. But there's no indication that it's in writing. And of course, one of the challenges we have is if somebody says, well, you know, Bob told me it was okay to do that, or Sally said I was authorized to do that. Is there any reason why asking for something in writing, even as simple as an email, would pose a problem?
I don't think it would. We can certainly incorporate that.
So let me ask both Mr. Coelho and Mr. Shapiro to bring this back with some language about knowledge of recording and something that indicates that when there is a designee, that he or she be designated in writing, so that there's a little tighter than, you know, just, yeah, sure, fine, from a busy employee. But could I ask on all of the ones that we forward out of here today, gentlemen, Mr. Coelho and Mr. Shapiro, if you could go back and double check them for whether or not the designee language specifically says in writing, and make sure that they all say in writing. And if you could double check that when there is a recording, that it be, where appropriate, informed and knowledgeable consent. And if not appropriate, in this case, if it's just a condition of bidding for the county, that it is at least with the knowledge of people who are there, so that people know that's the rules of the game. Whenever possible, I'd like it to be both not only known, but something that people consent to. But I understand that in a bidding conference, that's a condition to bidding, so fair enough. Any questions about that, Mr. Coelho, Mr. Shapiro? Am I being clear about what I'm hoping we see?
I believe you're clear. Thank you.
Good. Supervisor Chavez on this item? Good. Okay. Thank you. Then we move to the Registrar of Voters, which is item R. Thank you, gentlemen. And security cameras. And here again, we have some language about law enforcement agencies under third-party data sharing. If somebody from Registrar can come on up, even if it turns out we don't have questions for you. But I'm looking at the paragraph 8, which is actually 3 or 4 paragraphs. The third-party data sharing shall be limited to only the following law enforcement agencies, comma, and then the same language, Mr. Coelho and others. Again, it may be clear, but if and it may just be that I'm the one struggling with it. But at first blush, to me, the law enforcement agencies, comma, without any requirement that it be with respect to a specific administrative, civil, or criminal investigation. I guess I'm not trying to get in the way of people doing their jobs, and I'm not trying to get in the way of anybody keeping everybody safe and secure. I get that that's the role of these tools that we're using, in this case security cameras, but I do want to make sure that people don't just sort of walk in and make themselves feel like, because we have had cases, you know, to their credit, both the district attorney and the sheriff have identified folks who misuse the criminal database, for example. So, you know, unfortunately, there's always that one bad apple out there. So I just want to make sure that there's a real reason and that there's some indication, whether that rises to the level of a subpoena or a warrant or exigent circumstances, or whether we're just going to, but at least it would be a minimum to me that there be a specific administrative, civil, or criminal investigation that was identified. I'll let you come back to us with something more there. And then it goes on in the middle of paragraph 8, says, it shall be permissible for video footage to be provided to law enforcement representatives if the department head or assistant department head believes that the footage shows behavior or activity that appears to be unauthorized, improper, illegal, or in furtherance of illegal activity. If the law enforcement representatives request video footage from the ROV, the department head or assistant department head shall consider that request in consultation with the Office of the County Council to determine if there is a legal requirement, board policy, or court order that requires, authorizes, or prohibits the disclosure of that specific footage. I thought that was useful language, so thank you for that. I mean, I thought it sort of started to say, let's have an intelligent conversation about what's allowed, what's prohibited, what's required, so on and so forth. But I do think we need a little more clarity about that. And then let me just call out the language under data retention, paragraph 6, as language that I found helpful, which we don't have in every one of our policies. It says, the ROV shall maintain the video data for a period not to exceed 60 days. I can actually understand what that means. The data is not going to be held for more than 60 days. Clear. And then it goes on to say, unless, and that talks about circumstances where it will have to be held for a longer period, but then it also indicates that video footage that is retained by the ROV for these purposes shall be destroyed no later than 1 year after the administrative or disciplinary or criminal investigation or proceeding has concluded, unless it is retained for blah, blah, blah. So again, clear on 60 days, that's helpful. Then, okay, but if we have a good reason, we're going to hang on to it. But even if we hang on to it, we're not going to keep it for more than a year after that good reason has been addressed. And again, I thought that was helpful. So the outstanding issue for me is this issue of under what circumstances we hand things to law enforcement. Okay. Anything else on that one, Supervisor Chavez? All right, thank you. Thank you both. Roads and Airports has S&T. And if they could come on up, if somebody's here from Roads and Airports. Thanks. Welcome, and if you would introduce yourself, please.
Hi, good afternoon. Tony Arata, Roads and Airports Deputy Director.
Thank you so much for being with us. So on the Airport Noise and Operations Monitoring System, NOMS, you learn something new every day in this job. That's what I like about it. Under paragraph 6, which is page 2 of 3, packet page 148, it indicates that all data from NOMS shall be archived for 365 days before being recorded over, with the following exceptions. The language there is not clear about the fact that that's a maximum. It says that it shall be archived for 365 days. So if it was archived for 20 years, it would still have been archived for 365 days. It does then go on to say before being recorded over, but it doesn't say that they absolutely will record over it or purge the previous data. So I think it's just a small drafting issue. And if there needs to be, shall be held for 1 year and deleted within 13 months, but no longer than 18 months, or whatever it is, we just need some nice, clear language about how do we know that it's going to be purged and by what time period. And it sounds like within a year is more or less it. Is it supposed to be held for 365 days because there's a requirement to do that, or is that just the capacity of the system?
I believe that's the way the system is set up. It's a hard 365 days, and it's just a rolling.
Yeah. If we could just get some specificity and commitment in the policy that within a time certain, which you can describe, it will be gone. That's the concern, because as you can tell, part of the concern I am continuing to express is about retaining databases of otherwise lawfully activity. Okay. Supervisor Chavez, anything on this one? And then if we go to your next item, T, which is in connection with the facility security cameras, same issue under data retention, paragraph 6. The department shall maintain/retain video data for up to 30 days before the data is recorded over. Not clear that after 30 days the data will be gone. And if that's the commitment, then it would be helpful if it could be expressed as that commitment. And then, for example, later in that same paragraph, now at the top of page 3 of 4, it says that where video data that is retained by the department for these purposes shall be destroyed no later than 1 year after administrative discipline. So that's language that's real clear. No later than a year after the disciplinary action, it's purged. So if we can just get a little more clarity about that, that would be great on paragraph 6 in the earlier part of the paragraph. Thank you very much. So that's S&T, and then that takes us to Social Services Agency. Can we get somebody from Social Services to join us? Thank you for waiting. And tell us who you are, please.
I'm with Social Services Agency. I'm the Security and Safety Manager.
Welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
No, we need that button to be pushed.
Just move closer. Can you hear me? Okay. Name is Sid Hall with the TSS at Social Services.
Thank you both again. So authorized and prohibited uses, which is paragraph 2, but looking at page 2 of 4, this is the telephonic and voice recording equipment policy. It says the technology and resulting recording shall be used for county business purposes only, not personal purposes, semicolon, shall be used in a legal manner, dash, including to the extent legally required, providing advance notice to those being recorded and obtaining their agreement and consent, or an authorized representative's agreement and consent to be recorded. And the issue that I'm raising here is it indicates essentially that we're only going to give them notice and ask for consent if it's required. In other words, we're only doing the minimum that is required by law rather than extending ourselves and providing knowledge and an opportunity to decline doing more than the minimum required by law. So I'd like to ask you to take a look at that and see if there's a way to do more than the minimum that is required by law. In other words, following the law should be our minimum threshold.
Correct.
Doing a better job than that in terms of giving people notice and or asking for their consent. Now, it may be that in your work there are times when they don't get to consent, that if they want to proceed through a certain process that they have to be recorded. I understand that, in which case I'm not asking you to break some other rule or requirement. But I am saying I don't want following the law to be it should be the floor, not the ceiling. And what we're saying here is that we're only going to do this to the extent that it's legally required. So if I can just ask you to work with our county council and rethink that language, I think we can get to a good place. And then under data retention, page 3 of 4, it says all data shall be retained in accordance with applicable social service agency record retention and destruction schedule, but in all cases for a minimum of 3 years before they are destroyed. And I guess I would ask you, do we really need to retain all the data for 3 years? And I understand, in fairness to you gentlemen, when the county counsel's office in a prior administration was doing data retention policies, their emphasis was on hang on to stuff to meet the data retention requirements. But I think, frankly, we needed a greater sensitivity to when should we let go of stuff. This is, again, that finding that right balance. And what I notice is that while we've got a minimum, there's no maximum there. And I'm interested in knowing, again, are we keeping databases on people for 20 years? I don't think so. So if we could ask you to take a look at that language. And again, I think our county council can probably be helpful to you there. Okay?
We will. Yes, sir.
Thank you both very much. I know that this is a little outside the realm of your usual work, so I appreciate it. Then on the next piece, which is V, the Social Service Agency video security cameras, we are once again looking at the issue of law enforcement and the third-party data sharing, paragraph 8, which I think could use the same attention that we've talked about previously in terms of under what circumstances and to whom do we hand over this information. And that being said, I should say that on the previous page on data retention, very clear language about shall be retained for a period not to exceed 180 days. I think that's straight ahead, clear. Data that's retained by SSA for other purposes shall be destroyed no later than 1 year. Helpful language. So I just wanted to sort of call that out as the kind of thing that is, I think, useful in terms of making sure everybody knows what the rules are and can follow them. But I do think the issue about what we hand over to law enforcement, who qualifies under what circumstances, is probably important. Okay?
Yes, sir.
Supervisor Chavez, anything on any of those? All right. Thank you. Then I think what I will do is ask for a motion, and let's see if we're all on the same page here, to forward with a recommendation for approval C, E, F, G, H, I, K, L, M, N, and P, and I think those are ready to go with just the two caveats that we'd appreciate the review on designees shall be in writing, and that we wanted to make sure as well, can you remind me what my other item was? Designees are in writing and...
Informed consent.
Thank you. That was the other one. Thank you. Yes, and I'm going to ask for a motion in a moment, but to you, Mr. Coelho.
A question seeking clarification regarding designees. There are 3 areas where designees are usually identified. One is who may grant access. Another is who may provide information to third parties. And then the final section, it's one that the committee has not had any questions with previously, is at times in some of the policies, designees are listed in the oversight or enforcement area, the very final section of the policy. So, for example, it says the department head shall be responsible, or it says the department head or designee shall be responsible for oversight. The question for the committee and guidance would be appreciated so that we're meeting the expectations is, in that section regarding designees, is there a desire from the committee to have that also be designated in writing? Or are we mostly concerned with who has the authority to give out the information?
Well, the first is really who has the ability to access and look at.
Correct.
And then the second is who has the authority to give it out. And the third is, to your point, is the question of who has oversight. And I think what I would suggest is that the designee should be in writing in all cases. Again, just as simple as an email even, but otherwise, I just think it sort of becomes, not only, well, Bob told me it was okay, but, Bob told me it was okay 3 years ago, and I'm still working on my oral recollection from 3 years ago. I just think having something as simple as an email would be helpful. Supervisor Chavez, does that make sense to you? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for the clarifying question. All right, then motion to forward those items with recommendation for approval, Supervisor Chavez?
Yes.
And with the 2 reviews and amendments if and when were necessary. Thank you. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? There are none. Unanimously approved. Thank you. Painful, but progress. Thanks. Much appreciated. All right. Speaking of painful, how about that Smart Pass program? Item number 6. So, Mr. Mills, just so you know, I'm not going to shoot the messenger, as the expression goes, but I've been here 6 years, and as I understand it, we're looking at a program that today costs 3 times as much for a lower level of service, serving a fraction of our employees. Is that where we are?
That is correct.
Welcome.
Yes.
It's good to see you, Mr. Mills.
Likewise.
Thank you.
Chairperson Smitty and Vice Chairperson Chavez. John Mills, Employee Services Agency Director, and with me is Gina Donnelly, Deputy Director of the Employee Services Agency. When this issue was last before the committee and then the board, a 6-month extension of the SmartPass agreement through December 31st, 2018 was approved. Since that time, the Employee Services Agency has completed a solicitation process for a pre-tax commuter benefit program administrator as an alternative to the SmartPass. In addition, the Facilities and Fleet Department has completed a solicitation for a consultant to conduct a transportation demand management study. The recommendations from the study would likely inform the recommended options for employees to utilize the pre-tax commuter benefit. The TDM study is not anticipated to be completed before the end of this fiscal year, and the pre-tax commuter benefit program will not be operational until spring of this year. Therefore, the administration is seeking an extension of the SmartPass program agreement through December 31st of 2019 to remain in compliance with SB 1339 and to allow for implementation of the pre-tax commuter benefit program informed by the TDM study. And with that, we're available for any questions.
Thank you. Supervisor Chavez, comments or questions?
I think the only thing I wanted to add is that there's a lot of work being done by BTA right now as part of their ad hoc financial stability committee that's going to take a look at the services and offerings it's going to have. And I don't think it'll be fast enough for MTC is working on a new mechanism for Clipper that will make it easier for us to be connected, for our employees to be connected to other options for commuting, meaning, express buses and the like in a more cost-effective way. So I think from a timing perspective, it also gives us the opportunity to see what the final product is that comes out of BTA from a new service plan.
Thank you. Mr. Mills, did I miss it? Is there reference here to what the actual 2019 cost of the program is?
No, there was not a reference to the 2019 program cost yet in this report.
Okay. Well, in a minute when I ask for a motion, I'm going to ask for a motion that simply passes this on to the board without a recommendation. In the absence of a number at this point, I'd be loath to do that, I think. The other question I had is I noticed that it says on average only 6.22% or 1,326 of county employees have taken advantage of the SmartPass program to date in 2018. Our IHSS folks participate in this program as well, though, yes?
That's correct, yes.
So does that 1326 incorporate all participants, both from our county staff and our IHSS?
No, that 1326 only includes the county, the courts, and the housing authority. IHSS, as I understand it, the number is roughly 2,300 in addition to the 1,300.
Got it. Okay. And then I think I will just look forward to a better day and ask my colleague if she'll offer a motion to advance this to the full board without recommendation.
So moved.
Motion by Chavez, second by Simidian, without objection, so ordered. Thank you very much. Thanks.
Thank you.
That takes us to item number 7, charging stations. Report on electric vehicle charging station fees at county facilities. Nice to see some folks smiling as they come down to see us. That's great. Thank you. And could we ask the team to introduce themselves, please?
Hi, it's Jeff Draper from the Facilities and Fleet Department.
Susanna Mercado, Climate Change Sustainability Program Manager in Facilities and Fleet.
Thanks again. And the last name was Mercado?
Mercado, yes.
Mercado. Thank you, Ms. Mercado. Would you like to make an opening presentation? Or would you like us to just jump right in with our questions?
Whatever you prefer.
Supervisor Chavez, I've got a couple of questions.
Okay.
The report's clear. Thank you for that. I get it. I understand the thinking. I've got a couple of concerns, and I'm not quite sure where I'm going to come down on this yet, which is why I'm delighted to have you here. The first question I have is, so the proposal is essentially designed to get folks out of the spaces once they've completed charging. Do I have that part right? And to do that by charging 25 cents an hour for the first 4 hours and then say, okay, now it's $5 an hour, and give people a little incentive to make way for somebody else. Do we know what percentage of these are used by our employees as distinguished from the members of the public? So if I went out and looked at 100, just to keep my percentages simple, are 50% of them used by the public, 50% of them by the staff, or is it 80% by our staff and 20%? Do we know? And if we don't, that's okay. I'm just trying to get as much data as I can.
We do not have a breakdown of members of the public and county employees. However, we do have fleet vehicle information that charges at our stations.
Okay. Well, here's where I'm going, which is, and I'll look to the county executive as well. I'm not sure that and you know, some of our buildings, I mean, I'll take this one as an example. Running out to the car is a 15-minute proposition. By the time you get to the elevator, wait for the elevator, get down in the elevator, visit a few floors along the way, walk through the lobby, get to your car, come back again. Do we really want to be incentivizing our employees to be taking a break during the middle of the workday to go move their car and then have to hunt for a new parking space? I'm not sure I think that's the best use of employee time. That's the first issue I've got. So I'll let that one sit for just a minute. The second is, and I understand very clearly, and again, I thought the memo did a nice job of saying, hey, look, we're trying to make space here so that other people can come along and charge their cars. But by charging, at this point in, you know, the growth of the electric vehicle movement in California, are we providing a disincentive rather than an incentive for more people to go get electric vehicles? So, yeah, we'll get some money. I think, Ms. Draper, you indicated that we were hoping to recover about $175,000 a year in response to a question from my office. But, you know, one of the benefits of providing free charging stations is that it makes people think, oh, I can go get an EV and I'll be able to charge it for free in a lot of places. So if our goal is, you know, to get to that, I think it's 1.5 million vehicles that the state has targeted by 2025. I can't remember whether, and, you know, we're only at, I think, 5% right now in California. You know, would we be better advised to say, you know what, let's just keep not charging and give people an incentive? And I understand that there's a cost to that. So really, you know, on the other hand, it's a disincentive to people if they can't find a place to charge because people are sitting in them all day long, which is part of the reason I was trying to get a sense for whether it's members of the public who hopefully are not spending all day long in one of our places, as opposed to our employees who probably, we hope, is spending all day long. But any thoughts about whether we're disincentivizing people from getting EVs rather than incentivizing them?
Not really along those lines, no, sir.
Okay. Well, it's something I'm thinking about as we have this conversation, just because we've certainly seen dramatic growth in the last 4 or 5 years. I mean, the growth year over year has been really noteworthy. On the other hand, we're still at just 5%. And, you know, my own work in renewable energy was focused on, obviously, reducing carbon footprint, and renewables have been the way we've been able to meet our climate goals in California. But the place where we haven't made the progress is in transportation, where I think 40% of the greenhouse gases come from transportation. So I'm constantly thinking to myself, do I really want to get in the way of folks getting an electric vehicle?
Supervisor, if I could offer a couple of thoughts. Anecdotally, we do know that the public uses a number of our EV chargers. We know that buses of people get the van pool, actually, they come in and park, the van pool picks them up and takes them to work somewhere else. So that kind of is an interesting anecdotal event for us. The other thing we're also trying to do is to balance the number of EVs with our own fleet. So our fleet hasn't been electrified yet either. And so having cars parked into the EV stalls all the time becomes problematic. Now, arguably, we're getting better technology at hitting the road, so the EVs that are actually hitting the road today are running longer distances without having to charge every day. So things will get better, and we'll have plenty of opportunity in the evenings to charge our EVs.
Supervisor Chavez?
So just to follow up on that, you know, a couple things that I think you raise an excellent point around whether or not we're going to be able to charge cars faster and how batteries are functioning. I think all of that is just, you're right. We got to really think about that. And I just want to divide up the bus that drops people off versus the county staff and really providing support to them. For the bus that drops people off, I thought you needed a sticker to be able to park in our lots.
Not in the EVs.
So do we, I mean, that actually may be something we just want to think about from a policy perspective. Like it just may make sense. And not that we want to discourage people from rideshare and carpooling and all that, but what my thought would be is that there would be value in finding out who the employer is and then working with them to either pay, you know, a certain amount or, you know, because again, even from a public perspective, I don't think I mind so much the EVs being charged here. It just would mean that we would structure the parking lot in a different way so we had more charging stations than we do today. That may, in an odd way, we may be looking at just making a bigger investment in EVs. And I just want to reinforce the point that Supervisor Simitian raised, and this is something I've been really concerned about, and I've not done a very good job of conveying my concern in a way that I think the staff and or my colleagues have said, oh, this is a great idea. I am very mindful, and I'm sure you all are too, that we see so much happening in the transportation and car environment and the technology environment that we're at an odd place because it's hard to determine under what terms and conditions do you make an investment in something that may be outmoded in, it feels like, in 2 years. All that being said, it does seem to me that rethinking the investments we're making relative to electric vehicles and even hydrogen vehicles and how we're using this facility in the short run makes a lot of sense because you know, I have been trying to think very critically about our partnership or lack thereof with VTA, and in some ways thinking a lot more about rideshare and watching the fight that's happening statewide with Turo and renting cars and all of that, and wanting better to understand how we can provide a fleet and or commute options to our staff in a way that makes environmental sense, but also gives us all the opportunity to spend less time in our cars. And even the redesign of this building, I was reading VTA's feedback to us for the environmental impact report for the Civic Center, and I was really just marveling at how dated that is, like how it's really, the plan is for multi-year, but we have a very specific short-term set of goals. So anyway, I didn't mean to wrap you around a tree there. It is just to say that I would be very interested in coming back with a strategy of increasing the amount of electric vehicle charging stations that we have here and in other parts of our property. I think that's just the right thing to do. And I think in certain areas, and it may be after 5 o'clock, we do charge people to be here. Before 5, we don't, because they're going to be our employees. And I think the point that Supervisor Simitian raised about making it easier for people to be able to move their cars, we may think about an incentive for them because, you know, again, this is maybe a technological thing, but if you have your key to be able to go charge at other locations, I forgot what they're called, but it may be that we give people $5 to move their car to another location on a credit basis, so that they're not just staying in one place here. You know, to make it like, to give a value add to people commuting in a way different than driving a diesel, or a regularly, gas combustion engine vehicle.
Mr. Draper, the staff report indicates that we're moving to a more widespread program that, quote, could encompass 350 EV parking spaces at 19 county sites by 2020. But we're a long way from 350 at the moment, are we not?
We are. We still have to, we're going to be bringing back, obviously, the PG&E proposal, if you remember that program that was brought up, where PG&E will actually do most of the infrastructure investment, get them in place, and then we own and operate them for the most part. That's coming back as a proposal that hasn't fully fleshed out yet. But
Dr. Smith, I'm about to suggest to my colleague that we just ask for this report to come back in 2 years, see where we are, see what the patterns are. You know, if we're at 50% EVs in California, I'm probably going to say don't need that incentive anymore. You know, at the moment, I'm sort of inclined to say let's try and continue this effort to do everything we can to foster the growing use of the technology. Thoughts, Dr. Smith?
Good idea.
Okay.
May I ask, 2 year, I would just say 2 years on the outset, on the outside, but if there's something interesting that should come back sooner.
we agree. I think there may be opportunities either through the individual projects that we're doing or maybe in the Office of Sustainability report, we can add a little tick mark in there for progress in this area. So.
And actually, the other thing I was going to recommend is taking a look at the opportunities that BachMed is having, because they're continuing to get grants that they're giving out for all kinds of things. And one of the interesting things is I think both hydrogen and electric, and not in partnership necessarily with PG&E. I don't understand all the ins and outs of that, but I do think there's a value in us taking a look at that before we, wait too long. But I think the point that Supervisor Simonian's raising is I don't think we want to boot people out. I think we're still in the, please do it,
Supervisor Chavez, would you prefer that we ask that they come back in a year to this committee? Would that?
I think that would be great. Do you think that timing works?
It works well.
Great. Thank you.
Happy to look at it then, and if we punt for another year, so be it, but at least we'll have a chance to have the conversation again. So, thank you again. Much appreciated, and I don't think we need to forward this to the full board for consideration of taking no action. If somebody at the board wants to call the matter forward, even though we have indicated here, we'll just keep it in committee for the time being. So I'll ask for a motion from Supervisor Chavez to receive the report and to direct staff to come back in a year with an update on your thinking.
I'll make that motion, and thank you for your creativity. I understand what you're trying to get us to.
Good. All right. Without objection, so ordered. Ms. Mercado, nice to meet you. Thanks so much. That takes us to item number 8. This is the 2012 Measure A annual report. And Supervisor Chavez, you were prepared to put this on consent, as was I, except I had 2 very small items. So I'm not going to ask, just in the interest of time, I'm not going to ask for a report. I'm just going to make two requests of staff and see if they can accommodate them going forward. The first is, you all will recall that when we met previously to talk about the 2012 Measure A framework and use of funds and report, we talked about having essentially a 3-point description of the program goals as sort of a standard template for future reports. And I think we hit 2 out of 3 this year, but I think 1 was missed. And, not the end of the world. I think it's just an oversight. But I would like to reinforce the fact that it's what we've asked for and what I hope we'll see in the future. One-time tangible infrastructure investments, that one got covered. And interim funding for chronically underfunded areas to address community needs until a permanent funding solution is there. But the piece that was missing was the short-term investment, if I'm remembering my notes here correctly, in terms of the process. So we've got, let me restate that. We wanted it to be an annual report. So just scratch everything I said before. We wanted it to be an annual report. We got that. And we wanted it to include an analysis of accomplishments relating to projects of interest to the public. We got that. The piece we didn't get was the three-part description, which was the of program goals as the standard template for future reports. That was the one-time tangible infrastructure investments, the short-term investments in emerging services, and the interim funding for chronically underfunded areas. And so if we could make sure that the future reports worked from that template, that was the request. And I think it was just an oversight this time. So we're annual, that's good. We've got the analysis of accomplishments, that's good. But if we could use the three-point framework, that would be good. And then, forgive me now that I've got myself squared away, I just wanted to mention at packet page 279, what we have been calling all-inclusive playgrounds are now described as playgrounds capital projects. And then they're also mentioned at 278 as for 17-18 new 2012 Measure A projects included developing new county playgrounds. Could we ask that you actually use the phrase all-inclusive playgrounds as a term of art? I'm not trying to go with a brand name here like the San Jose Rotary Play Garden or Magical Bridge or anybody else who emerges, but I do want us to use the phrase all-inclusive playgrounds because I want us at every opportunity to sort of be reinforcing what we're trying to accomplish here, which is the creation of all-inclusive playgrounds. And I think, you know, if we just say we built some playgrounds, that's a nice thing, but talking about the special thing we're able to do with these funds and have committed to doing yet again is important. Okay? So those were my only items, and otherwise, Supervisor Chavez, I'm certainly happy to take a motion to receive the report. And forgive me for muddling through the first piece.
So I would move approval, and then I just actually prompted a question I hadn't thought about, but I would move approval, and then just to say that I thought the allocation sheet that you had in here on page 277 was really helpful in terms of giving people a picture of what we're doing. And well, anyway, I just wanted to say thank you. I thought that was like a very easy, simple thing I could use to explain how money's being used.
Okay. Thank you both. We have a motion from Chavez to receive the report, second from Simitian without objection. So ordered. Thanks again, gentlemen. And if you have any questions on that display issue, my office is happy to be a little clearer than I was today at the end of a long day. Thank you. Takes us to item number 9, which is the County Comms report. And welcome. Supervisor Chavez, would you like to hear a brief report, or do you want to jump right into questions? Brief report would be great. Hi, welcome. Please tell us who you are, even if we know.
Good afternoon, Supervisor Simitian and Supervisor Chavez. I'm Heather Plamondon, and I'm the Director of County Communications. And I'd also like to take a minute to introduce Denise Sellers, who is the Director of the Silicon Valley Regional Interoperability Authority. However, I will be making the presentation this afternoon as it's coming out of our office. So in front of you is a report that provides an update on the status of a very long regional interoperability project that has been underway beginning before 2012, but in earnest beginning in December of 2015. The most notable change in the report in front of you, as per the prior 6-month reviews that we have been giving you, is that we are experiencing some unfortunate delays, and we will be working on trying to negotiate a 1-year extension in the contract with Motorola Solutions Incorporated so that we may be able to finish the necessary construction on the remaining sites and then also provide for adequate time to do implementation, testing, and evaluation. I'm available for questions if you have any.
Supervisor Chavez, I've got a couple questions. And so to grossly oversimplify, the problem is we've had some delays in access, yes?
Correct.
Access to what?
Actually, it's access to the sites, and it's more so the documentation and the lease agreements that are necessary to be able to not only access the sites, but to deploy relatively expensive equipment inside of the sites.
Which leads to the next question. So what's the holdup?
So in some cases, unfortunately, when the system was designed, we weren't aware that there weren't existing lease agreements in place with some of these sites. We also were not aware that in some cases there were some necessary litigation that was in process in terms of easement discussions around some of the properties that are adjacent to close neighboring jurisdictions or neighboring property owners. In most of these sites are either city or county owned. In some cases, there are commercial leases that need to be amended or updated, and that has taken a little bit longer than we anticipated.
Again, to try and simplify, and all of this is to get us to the place where when we're not in a day-to-day circumstance where for the most part people can manage to make the systems work, but when we really do have that dreaded moment of emergency, everybody can talk to everybody. Is that a fair summary of what we're trying to accomplish here?
That is a fair summary, but we will be moving, in most cases, most of the daily public safety and public service operations onto this large regional network. It is a more current and effective technology, and it does provide much more significant coverage and capacity than the disparate systems that are deployed right now throughout the county and all of the cities.
And I just want to share with you all, because you don't have any reason to know this. So every time this subject's on the agenda, I turn to my staff and say, for God's sakes, aren't we done yet? And every time they say, no, they're merely making good progress. They are. And then every time I say back to them, you know what I hear from my constituents? I can hear that it's been 17 years since 9/11, and we still haven't figured out how to have a system that lets everybody talk to each other in a moment of emergency. And that's just something people are frustrated about. So I appreciate the efforts, I really do. I feel optimistic that the end is in sight, so I don't want to rain on that parade. But I want to share with you the questions and the concerns and the frustrations that I hear from my constituents, which is, gee, would have thought that would have been a hurry-up call, and here we are all these years later still plugging away. So, sorry for being a little bit of a downer here at the end of the day. Supervisor Chavez?
Nope, you did a good Debbie Downer.
Okay, that's it. So we're simply being asked to receive the report. Sounds like you are optimistic that while it's going to take a little longer, these are all just things we can work our way through, and we'll keep working our way through. Is that an accurate summary?
I think that's a very accurate summary.
Okay. Supervisor Chavez, motion to receive the report. Motion by Chavez, second by Semidian. And in all seriousness, thank you both for the work you're doing to make this happen. Thank you. That takes us to item number 10, the County Government Fellowship Program. This is another item that Supervisor Chavez mentioned as a possible consent calendar. I thought so too, but I'll ask a quick question of the staff. And I had a concern about the fact that there was a proposal to increase the minimum number of hours to 200 hours for a 5-week term, which means you could only participate if you were doing 40 hours a week for 5 weeks, if I understood it correctly. Did I get that right?
Yes, good afternoon. Andrea Contreras with County Executive's Office. We raised the minimum because we were noticing that with the placements, the scope of work could not be completed if they were there just pieced throughout the 5-week program. So 5-week full-time, whether that's within the 10-week program, but a 200-hour minimum, they would be able to better complete a scope of work and any projects that are brought to them.
Yeah, that being said, if somebody's going to come for 5 weeks, they may be gung-ho and they may be wanting to be with us, but I think one of the great benefits of this is that it introduces younger people to the really important and interesting work that the county does, and that once they come, they discover that, and we're bringing along the next generation of potential public servants. And it's summertime. People have family vacations or long weekends. They take a little R&R time so I guess my question is, could we make this work because right now it's 120 hours per 5 weeks, if I understand it correctly. And, to which I would say, fair enough, that's not an awful lot of time. But can we split the difference and call it 150 hours and hope that gets us there, but still gives people some Assembly Supervisor Chavez, it's odd things that attract our interest or attention, but on this one.
Yeah, what I would just ask or make a recommendation on this is that I think the really exciting thing, the way you presented this, is that we're using these young minds in a really positive, real way and not having them do busy work. And I think this is a reflection of you starting to rely on them. I mean, I know my office saves up projects now for the summertime for our own internship program. So what I would recommend is, what if what we did was put that out as a goal? Let's just try it this summer as a goal, and see what that gets us. Because I think I understand the point you're raising, Supervisor Simitian, that the added benefit is helping people fall in love with someplace we hope they work when they graduate, right? So I don't disagree with that, but I also think that if you have the flexibility to structure projects in a meatier way, that if you have the bandwidth of really pushing that 200 as a goal, as a request, but recognizing that that may not fit everybody's schedule. So I don't know the best way to communicate that, but I do know that I've been excited by the kind of projects you've been able to give out to those folks who have a little more time than, and we've been able to do that in our office as well, much meatier, real projects that we can actually use the work. How would you recommend that be done if you wanted to support what Supervisor Simitian's saying, which is not leaving young people out who could really benefit, and we could benefit from them?
So we're amenable to adjusting the time. However, I do want to make the point that it is difficult for the student to get acclimated with the county and get acclimated with the projects and what the need is, which is why the 120 was just definitely too low, but perfectly amenable to 150 hours, and having that internal the site supervisor being able to say, oh, you're taking a day off due to a sickness or a predetermined vacation, as you mentioned, that is okay, that can be within that time frame if it's just discussed in advance.
You're being remarkably tactful. I appreciate it. Here, let me tell you my own experience. My own experience, because we've had some ourselves over the years, is we've had some really great interns, fellows, externs, fellowships, whatever you want to call them. They come in a lot of different names. Every now and again, you get one who's flaky, and you have to say, no, this is serious. This is real work. It matters. You got to do this. Now, that's, in my experience, 1 in 20. So I've had a good experience. But the reason I latched on to 150 was because, it seemed to me that meant that people really were, over the course of 5 weeks, that's 30 hours a week. That seems to me to be enough to say, no, they're really here, and yet still provide. What's the stipend that we provide for the 5-week program?
For 5 week, it's a minimum of $3,500.
But that gets prorated down if they're doing lesser time, yes?
Yeah, we haven't allowed any student to do any less than 5 weeks. So we've just started at 5 weeks at the 120 hours up to the 6 weeks at 6,000.
Got it. Yeah,
But we do adjust accordingly.
I'd be open to saying 150 hours, but with direction to staff that departments can encourage fuller participation and communicate the value of that. I think the point that I had already given some thought to, but that you underscored that's an important one is, if they're going to do really serious work, it takes time to just get acclimated, figure out where the restrooms are, where do you park your car or get the light rail or whatever. So you don't want all the time to be sort of lost in the transition of coming, going, and getting acclimated. You want enough time for there to be real time for the work. So, Supervisor, go.
So I was just going to say a floor of 150, but be able to go up to 200 hours is what I would recommend. That way you have the flexibility, and the student has the flexibility to because for some of them that 5 weeks, I know for us that some of the students that we had that we were encouraging, we didn't actually take because their vacation time was right during the time that we had time for them. So for some of them, we moved them, actually. We made our program a little bit longer. But depending on the department, I think if the department could use someone at 200 and they're really excited about them, that they have the ability to work with them around their schedule to make it, longer.
I'm going to call that a motion, if I may.
So moved.
Second. We have no cards. Then without objection, unanimously approved. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. And that takes us, I think, to item 15. Am I correct in that? Yes. And that's our report on the county election and voting security and privacy. So let's ask folks to step up. And again, for those of you who are not familiar with this item, we take what we can in our open session, but by nature of the security implications, much of this has to be done in closed session. So let me begin by asking the Office of the County Executive and the Chief Information Security Officer and the Registrar of Voters if there's anything they'd like to share in open session relating to county election and voting security and privacy.
Yes, Justin Dietrich, Chief Information Security Officer. The one thing that we definitely would like to share is we completed a security awareness pamphlet for the candidates and posted it on the website and emailed it to the candidates to bring it was kind of twofold. One, to just kind of give general awareness to the candidates of cybersecurity threats and best practices, and then also who they can contact if they need assistance. And definitely give credit to Supervisor Chavez for bringing that to our attention. It was a great idea, so we went with it and have already sent that out and posted it on the website. So if any member of the public is interested in viewing that, they're welcome to as well. So, and thank you for County Council and Register of Voters assistance with that as well.
Supervisor Chavez?
No, but yay.
Yeah, well, yeah, and I'll say thank you. And I just, as a point of reference, when I was on the board 20 years ago, believe it or not, it was a new thing to talk about electronic filing of your campaign finance statements. And one of the points I made then was that's going to be a challenge for some folks. So let's set that process up in a way that allows them to learn. And and now you say electronic filing, and everybody goes, well, of course, that's
You'll laugh, but when you and I first got here, we still didn't have it mandatory. We had to do that because we still had people sending in their little papers. But yes, everybody's gotten on board, and you guys did a great job of helping them.
And that's the point, which is you have to help folks understand that, if we want people to comply, we've got to do it. Now, in this case, different story. It's a question of, a newly emerging issue. And if we want people to take the actions that will keep, their campaigns and the process free from interference, I think we're going to have to give them a little help along the way. So again, thank you to you all. Is that it for our open and public comment at this point before closed session items are appropriately addressed?
Yep, that's all I had.
All right. Well, then what I will say as items 16 and 17 is that I'm going to turn to the County Council for a brief announcement prior to the recess to closed session, and then we will recess to closed session to consider the items on our agenda. Following that, we will come back for item 18, which is to simply reconvene and announce reportable action, if any. Mr. Williams?
The committee will meet in closed session to discuss item number 17 as listed on the agenda for the October 11, 2018 FGOC meeting.
All right. We'll say thank you very much, and whether it is pursuant to Robert's Rules of Order or Rosenberg's Rules of Order, we are recessed to
You have to hit your gavel.
closed session. All right. Thank you. All right, thank you all very much. Our board, or our committee, I should say, has been meeting in closed session for item 17, and we have completed that closed session. We're now back to item 18, which is to reconvene in open session for a closed session report. And to that end, let me turn to our county counsel, Mr. Williams. Anything to report?
There were no reportable actions taken at the October 11, 2018 Finance and Government Operations Committee closed session meeting.
All right, then before we adjourn, truly before everybody bolts, I want to just make this announcement on the record, which is that we have a newly scheduled special meeting on October the 31st, Halloween, at 12 p.m., so middle of the day, on throttling of cellular service and its impact on emergency response. So this is a meeting scheduled for that date. Then we have our regularly scheduled special meeting on Thursday, November the 1st at 2 p.m. That's when we'll deal with information privacy issues again. Then we have our regularly scheduled regular meeting on Thursday, November the 8th at 2 p.m. And then we have a newly scheduled Thursday, November 29th meeting at 10 a.m., and that is in lieu of a December meeting, which will then be canceled. So the good news with all those meetings is we will have a clear agenda for this committee by the end of November and won't have to have a meeting in December. So October 31st, special meeting on throttling, then the information privacy meeting on November the 1st, then our regular meeting on November the 8th, and then a newly scheduled regular meeting on the 29th of November so that we can forego the December meeting. And with all that information being shared, we have come to the end of our agenda, and therefore, without objection and hearing none, we will adjourn to our next special meeting on Wednesday, October the 31st at 12 p.m. in these board chambers. Thank you all very much.